Good evening, everyone. I'm Deborah Jacobs, University Librarian and Vice Provost for Library Affairs, and it's a tremendous pleasure to welcome you this evening to this event. It's a celebration of the extraordinary Lisa Unger Baskin collection. Through her collecting, Lisa Baskin has sought to reveal the hidden history of women's work. As she has noted, women have always worked and have always supported themselves and their families. The Lisa Unger Baskin collection opens up a dizzying array of new directions in research and teaching, both at Duke and beyond, and we are thrilled that the collection is part of the David M. Rubenstein Rare Book and Manuscript Library, and that Lisa is partnering with us to continue to build it. This moment has been years in the making. Lisa began collecting over 45 years ago. She found mentors, allies, and friends along the way who helped her shape and expand her collection. Many of them are here tonight, and they are all recognized in the acknowledgments panels here in the reception space and in the exhibition. 8 years ago, Lisa decided that it was time to find an institutional home for her collection, a college or university that would care for it and ensure that it was used by scholars, students, and the public. Duke was one of the universities she considered. I vividly recall my visit to her home and her library in Leeds, Massachusetts. I had no idea what to expect, and it was overwhelming. Looking through books, manuscripts, ephemera, photographs, and artifacts with her as she gave me a first glimpse of its riches. It was overwhelming, as I said. That's capital O, overwhelming. It was very moving to learn about how she had shaped her collecting and what she had learned. Her collection building is a kind of activism. Knowing about the past is crucial to undoing structural racism and misogyny. And I'm grateful and very happy that Lisa chose to entrust her collection to us. The collection arrived in 2015 in over 600 boxes. During the past 4 years, librarians, archivists, conservators, and technical experts from across the Duke libraries have worked to catalog, process, and conserve the collection so that it can be used. Selections from the collection have been digitized, and librarians are working with faculty to introduce students to the collection through their courses. The exhibition, 500 Years of Women's Work, the Lisa Unger Baskin collection, marks the public debut of this collection. It is co-curated by Lisa Baskin, Naomi Nelson, and Lauren Reno, and co-sponsored by the Grolier Club. We made no small plans. This is the largest exhibition the Duke Libraries have presented, and it will travel in December to New York to the Grolier Club. I would like to congratulate and thank E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation Exhibits Coordinator Meg Brown and Exhibits Preparator Yoon Kim for translating the curator's vision and Rita Jules's design into such a magnificent show. I hope you all agree with me, it is magnificent. Duke Library's web developers have created a digital version of the exhibition as well. Special thanks go to Michael Dahl, and the exhibit curators have worked with colleagues in communications and at Miko McGinty Incorporated to publish a full-color catalog. I'm sure you've seen it outside. It's gorgeous. The catalog itself is women's work. The contributors, designers, technicians, and essayists are all women, and the typefaces used were designed by women. This was not happenstance, but a deliberate choice by the curators to highlight contemporary contributions by women to scholarship and the book trades. The many library staff, collaborators, and contributors who worked on the exhibitions and catalog are listed in the acknowledgments panels, and they are also wearing buttons featuring Maria Sibylla Marion's butterflies. They would be happy to talk with you about their work. The Duke Libraries are grateful for the generous financial support that has made it possible to bring the Lisa Unger Baskin collection to Duke so it may be open to the world. The E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation provided the lead gift, and Sarah Peter and David M. Rubenstein made founding gifts. Jean Fox-O'Barr, one of the founders of the Sally Bingham Center for Women's History and Culture, has been inspiring in her support in all ways for bringing the Lisa Unger Baskin collection to Duke. A full listing of all the donors to the collection so far can be found on the acknowledgments panel. We are grateful for the support of so many alumni and friends. The Gladys Kriebel-Delmas Foundation and Barbara and Michael Dugan co-sponsored these opening events at Duke, and it's an honor to have the Dugans with us here tonight, though I haven't seen them yet, so I hope they're here. There they are. Hello. Finally, I invite you to take a close look at the lucite supports and cradles used in the exhibition. They were designed by Professor Ann Satterback's students in the Pratt School of Engineering, especially for the Rubenstein Library. Yoon Kim fabricated them in one of Duke's 3D printing and laser cutting labs, and they are designed to be reusable. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Ed Balleisen. Edward Balleisen has served as Duke's Vice Provost for Interdisciplinary Studies since 2015 and works with university-wide institutes and initiatives, each of Duke's 10 schools, and our libraries to foster collaborative, interdisciplinary research, teaching, and engagement. He also oversees Bass Connections, an innovative program that each year catalyzes dozens of interdisciplinary problem-centered research teams involving faculty, graduate students, and undergraduates. He is a national leader in conversations about the need to reconfigure doctoral training to foster intellectual versatility and career diversity. Balleisen is the lead PI on Duke's Versatile Humanists project, funded by a Next Generation Implementation grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Among the recent initiatives that Balleisen has developed are Story Plus, an intensive summer experience hosted at the Franklin Humanities Institute that brings together mini teams of undergraduates and doctoral mentors to tackle public-facing humanities projects, and Archival Expeditions, a Duke Libraries program that enables doctoral students in partnership with Duke faculty members to develop archival-based research modules for existing undergraduate courses. As a professor of history and public policy, Balleisen explores in his research and writing the historical intersections among law, business, politics, and policy in the modern United States. He has pursued a number of collaborative projects with historians and other social scientists who study regulatory governance in industrialized and industrializing societies. Balleisen's most recent book is Fraud, An American History from Barnum to Madoff. How timely. Princeton University Press, 2017, which received the Business History Conference's 2018 Ralph Gomery Prize. In this wide-ranging history, he emphasizes the enduring connections between capitalist innovation and business fraud, as well as the vexed efforts by private organizations and state agencies to curb the worst economic deceptions. Balleisen appreciates and champions the Duke Libraries, and for 2 decades he's worked closely with the library's staff, especially at Rubenstein, to bring sustained archival engagement into his undergraduate courses and to expose doctoral students to the rewarding work of mentoring undergraduate research. He has received 3 university teaching prizes, the Johnson Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching in 2005, the Alumni Distinguished Undergraduate Teaching Award in 2015, and the Dean's Award for Excellence in Mentoring in 2015. Please join me in welcoming our good friend, Ed Balleisen.
So it's always good that the Duke Libraries are investing in flexible technology. Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Deborah. We gather tonight to celebrate a truly extraordinary collection about the worlds of labor and activism that women made, and the opening of a spectacular exhibition that shows off that collection's historical depth and cultural range. If you didn't get a chance to look earlier tonight, I just urge you to go back and spend the time that it deserves. I'm so pleased this evening that we are joined by the prime mover behind this remarkable assemblage of books, correspondence, material culture, and ephemera, Lisa Unger Baskin, as well as many of her friends and family members who have traveled from far and wide for this wonderful occasion. I can only begin to convey the monumental nature of the Baskin collection this evening. Let me try to outline its significance through brief reflections in three parts: archival prologue, present, and promise. Archival prologue. 500 years of women's work. The exhibition title expresses the enormity of the scope. A half millennium of female labor across large swaths of the globe. On all the shelves, in all the boxes, are countless narratives of underpaid and underrecognized toil, of callings and family, community and social movements, of inventiveness and perseverance despite adverse circumstances, of occupations and professions that expanded far beyond conventionally presumed women's work. 25 generations of thinking about and depicting those varied endeavors. In prose and poetry, letter and song, in calligraphy and chicken scratch, through embroidery and woodcuts and copper engravings, in rough sketches, careful lithographs, and figurines, via charcoal pencil and brilliantly colored ink, within journals, scrapbooks, and broadsides, inside sumptuous pig leather bound volumes, on sturdy pages that began as rags and brittle sheets of cellulose, all represented in more than 11,000 printed books, along with thousands of manuscripts, photographs, and trade cards, among other artifacts. A mere half-century ago, amid a waxing American women's movement, indeed, as Deborah suggested, a constitutive element of that movement, Lisa Unger Baskin began to amass historical renderings of women at work. Driven by a democratic sensibility, Lisa gathered works and cultural products from the marginalized and middling sorts, as well as the highly educated. Her goal, year after year after year, was to document the variety of female experience in the multitudinous worlds of employment and vocation. We are so greatly in her debt. But why Duke as the repository for this collection, amid the many great libraries that might have served as its home? We should pause in the very month of Anne Fearer Scott's passing to take note of the importance of women's history and gender, sexuality, and feminist studies on this campus. Decades of committed work underpin the creation of the Sally Bingham Center for Women's History and Culture, an indispensable prerequisite for the Rubenstein Library to be able to attract the Baskin collection. Anne Scott, who came to the Duke History Department in 1961, and Jean Fox Obar, with us this evening, a political scientist who took up a faculty position in 1969, led the charge. But there has been a half-century of worthy assistance from colleagues: Carla Holloway, Bill Chafe, Kathy Rudy, Tavolia Glimpf, so many others, as well as from students, librarians, and archivists. Their many undertakings have always been part of a communal effort, always characterized by an entrepreneurial ethos and quite a bit of outrageous ambition. That community's gumption and record of achievement are key reasons why first Sally Bingham, and then Lisa Unger Baskin, and now still other collectors have brought their holdings in women's history and culture to this library. Archival present. We are nearly 4 years into the Baskin Collection's residence at Duke. The massive work of cataloging and metadata creation continues apace, ably overseen by Naomi Nelson, the head of the Rubenstein Library, and Laura Mickham, director of the Sally Bingham Center, standing at the back. Scholars and students from across the Quad and the four corners of the earth are now presenting themselves at the Rubenstein welcome desk, asking to examine Baskin items. Already, library staff have fully digitized some documents and made them available through the Duke Library website, most notably the complete set of Emma Goldman letters. Faculty members have begun to incorporate Baskin collection materials into classes. To cite just one example, the students lucky enough to take historian Tom Robichaux's focus course, Scientists, Magicians, and Engineers in the Renaissance, now have intense encounters with the works of early modern Dutch entomologist and artist Maria Sibylla Merian. Last summer, a Story Plus team comprised of 3 Duke undergraduates and a humanities doctoral student constructed an online research guide to Baskin collection materials and other papers in the Rubenstein Library that relate to women and labor movements. The team generated a series of informative profiles of especially valuable manuscript collections, as well as 2 superb digital exhibits, one on labor organizing and prostitution, one on the working mom. In just 4 years, holdings within the Baskin collection have become crucial touchstones for major scholarly contributions, such as Meredith Goldsmith's path-breaking work on Edith Wharton, and Jane Robinson's stirring new book, Hearts and Minds, The Untold Story of the Great Pilgrimage and How Women Won the Vote. In short, the items that comprise the Baskin collection have begun to move from shelf to reading room table, sparking classroom dialogue, informing research agendas, enlivening imaginations, provoking tantalizing questions, and furnishing so much evidence to address them. Archival promise. The word is out. If you want to examine the history of European midwifery, the role of women in the British and American anti-slavery movements, the long-standing place of women in printmaking, or literally thousands of other issues involving gender and the worlds of work, science, art, and public discourse, head to Duke. And so the seasoned scholars will make the journey to Durham, from history, literature, and creative writing, from cultural anthropology and religion, from art history, fine arts, and documentary studies, from African American studies and sociology and political science, and yes, from gender, sexuality, and feminist studies. They will share the reading room with eager doctoral students, intent upon finding an angle of vision for a dissertation prospectus, or digging into the long haul of sustained inquiry. We can count on it. The articles and books built on analysis of Baskin materials, the footnotes that collectively denote the variety of sources it contains, they'll pile up. The number of professional podcasts and documentaries that draw on those resources, they'll increase in number. We can count on it. But I want to close with an invitation to the scholars best situated to mine the rich printed and archival ores now deposited in the Rubenstein stacks. The humanists and social scientists who research, write, and teach here at Duke. We are still in the early days of our university's second half-century of engagement with gender as a fundamental category of scholarly analysis. Over the next decade, over the next quarter century, how can we best build intellectual communities that encourage our students to explore those innumerable archival seams? How can we make the Baskin collection a pivotal resource for doctoral training and undergraduate teaching, even in students' very first semester in college? If we dare, how can we go even further and provide the scaffolding that opens the digitized parts of the collection to community college classes, even middle school and high school students? We don't have to conjure up entirely new structures to realize such possibilities. We are now almost 10 years into the process of refining the humanities lab as a mode of collaborative inquiry. And with the help of a grant from the Mellon Foundation, we are now embedding the humanities lab into departments so they draw on and amplify the courses that our students take. Could we imagine and then develop lab themes that take advantage of Baskin materials, whether based at the Franklin Humanities Institute or anchored in a department? Might some of the resulting courses involve team-based research and writing that attains the highest scholarly standards and joins the corpus of published Baskin-inflected scholarship? Through archival expeditions, might doctoral students create research modules based on Baskin materials for undergraduate courses? Through StoryPlus and Basque Connections, might research teams use Baskin resources to develop public-facing projects, websites, podcasts, documentaries? Though still in its very early phases, might an emerging partnership with Durham Technical Community College, also funded by Mellon, catalyze the development of open source teaching modules based on digitized sources like the Emma Goldman letters? Through our Teach House program, which supports recent Duke alums who take up teaching positions in local public schools, might we test those modules in secondary classrooms? The unifying thread of this massive collection, Lisa Unger Baskin has observed, rests on the fundamental truths that, quote, women have always been productive and working people, and that this history has essentially been hidden. In the years to come, I look forward to seeing how our creative scholars, archivists, and librarians work together to bring that essential history out of the shadows and into the education of students, whatever their gender identity, from whatever background, here at Duke and beyond. Let's count on it. We turn now to the conversational part of the program. It's my great pleasure to introduce Lisa Unger Baskin and Naomi Nelson. I'll start with Lisa. Born in Brooklyn, educated in the New York City public schools and at Cornell University, Lisa is a political activist and organizer, bookseller, collector, and curator. She curated a Phyllis Wheatley exhibition marking the 200th anniversary of the poet's death, and for that occasion, commissioned June Jordan to write The Difficult Miracle of Black Poetry in America, something like a sonnet for Phyllis Wheatley. Baskin also curated the inaugural exhibition at the Elizabeth Cady Stanton House, Seneca Falls Women's Rights National Historical Park, and a variety of other exhibitions. An associate member of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America, she belongs as well to the faculty of the Colorado Antiquarian Book Seminar and the board of the David Ruggles Center for History and Education, the Grolier Club, the American Antiquarian Society, and as an honorary member, Wolfson College, Oxford University. As we've heard, for over 50 years, still going on, and to all of our great benefit, she has collected books, manuscripts, ephemera, and objects documenting women's work from the Renaissance forward. Lisa has always had a particular interest in women in the book trade, past and present, as well as a deep commitment to mentoring young women collectors and booksellers. Please join me in welcoming Lisa Unger Baskin. And in conversation with Lisa, we have Naomi L. Nelson, Associate University Librarian and Director of the David M. Rubenstein Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Duke University. The very best university library for teaching in the country, maybe the world. Her interests in history and women's studies were first sparked during her undergraduate years at Duke, in classes with Jean Fox-Obar, Tom Robichaux, Elizabeth Clark, Sarah Westfall, Bill Chafe, Sidney Nathans, and many others. And in hours spent researching in the then manuscripts department and university archives. Those experiences led her to first to complete a doctoral degree in history at Emory University, and eventually, very much to our benefit, to come back to Duke. She is a presidential appointee to the National Historical Publications and Records Commission and a faculty member in the Rare Book School at the University of Virginia. Naomi and Lisa.
Lisa.
Naomi.
It has been such an honor and a joy to work with you over the past several years, to think about the future for your collection, the next chapter in its life, the next work that we might do together. It has been such a pleasure to have you here. When Lisa's collection came to Duke, it wasn't just 600 boxes that came.
It was me.
And that has been wonderful. One of the goals that we had for the exhibition was to try to capture some of your knowledge about the collection, about the materials, to understand why these materials are here and are together. It was all intentional. A really important part of the story is what you as a woman and an activist have brought to your collecting, how you saw things differently than other people, how you noticed different things, saw different kinds of connections, and gave value to things that other people had not valued. And that is such an important part of this. And so that's why it's so important that your collection be named for you, the Lisa Unger Baskin collection, and why we seek to have these conversations with you, both here tonight, but also with students, and also through things like the catalog. So it seems very appropriate that we start this opening of your collection with a conversation with you, as Ed said, the prime mover behind it. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then we're going to open to the audience for a couple of questions and see if we can unpack this a little bit. So I'm going to start with a really basic collection. Why did you start collecting women's history?
I started, my political activism has always informed my collecting. My collecting was not done in a vacuum. I've been a political activist since I was a kid, growing up in Brooklyn, becoming involved with the civil rights movement, then going off during summers, becoming involved with people who were coming back from the South. I was 12. And then ultimately moving to Northampton, where I was involved in the anti-war movement and the founding of the First Valley Women's Center in Northampton. I'm delighted my friend Patricia is here, who we painted walls together, and I learned about archiving firsthand. But my activism always was predicated on the fact that the world really needed other vision. The world really needed to understand that there were whole components of people who lived in that world who were not represented. We learned history and never learned history about African Americans. We never learned history of women. Prime example is somebody like the great collector Arturo Schomburg or Charles Blockson, who were great collectors, and not particularly, we know Schomburg's name because of the library, a New York public library system. But when Charles Blockson began as a child, he was in a class when he was about 7, and he was told by a teacher that there was no history. There was no Black history. You have no history. And that, there's a wonderful video if people are interested in seeing that. If you just Google Charles Blockson, he's still alive. His collection is at Temple University. But he was told essentially there was no history. And he spent his life amassing hundreds of thousands of books and artifacts and manuscripts that documented the fact that indeed there was a history and there is a history. And that really is, in some ways, what has motivated me as a collector. I've always collected. I was a collector as a child. Whether I was collecting baseball cards or rocks, and I'm a Brooklyn Dodger fan, unreconstructed, and when they abandoned me for the West Coast, I didn't, that was it. But somebody like Blockson was a really great example. And I think that understanding that there are whole segments of people that are not documented, and women who represent more than half of the human race does not have their history documented in a way that, and so the collection, as you all understand, possibly by now, the collection is not a literary collection. I was never really, with a few exceptions, drawn to collecting women writers. But I was curious, and some of this happened very gradually, to understand what it was that women were doing. And I saw examples all around of women working. And as I began collecting, of course, I began seeing scraps of evidence of work. But when I was a kid and when I was in school, even when I was at university, there was not a single thing that taught us. I had very few women faculty members. I always, as a kid, looked for things that were done, made by women artists, artifacts that were made by women. And it was a story that was not readily available. Does that answer a little bit of why?
It does.
Yeah?
It does.
Okay.
What were some early materials that you acquired that helped set you on the path that you were on and that particularly inspired you?
Well, I always feel that, in fact, I gave a talk that says you can't do it alone. None of this happens in a vacuum. And there is a vast network of people who have supported what I do, in that there's a world of book dealers and ephemera dealers and paper dealers who really began to find things for me when they saw what I was interested in. And the beginnings, I didn't know we had a history. I didn't know there were women working, printing in the Renaissance. I had no idea any of that existed. And so I began, as many of us do. I know that there's 19th century history. I understood there was history of women's suffrage, but I had no idea that women were having printing presses in 1478 or binding books in the 19th century or designing typefaces, as we've demonstrated in using contemporary type designers for the catalog of the exhibition. So amongst the people who really were dealing at that time in the 60s, and I was an active antiques dealer and book dealer at the time, there was a couple, Avis and Rocky Gardner, who were extraordinary dealers. And they traveled across this country, and they went into every barn and every nook and every cranny. And from the Gardners, I acquired The Revolution. The Revolution is the journal that was published by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Parker Pillsbury, and Susan B. Anthony. And it's the run of The Revolution that's here now at Duke is the most complete run known. A few copies had to be filled in when LC was digitizing their collection. Ann Gordon is here. She's one of the editors of the Stanton Anthony Papers Project, who was key to this. But I think I was collecting way before I knew Ann. Yes? Right. But it was people like Avis and Rocky who were going and coming back to Northampton and offering me stacks of ephemera, really incredible, just multiple copies of flyers that women kept and were found in their attics, or the Revolution and the run of the Revolution that's here. Only volume 1, number 1, is a little dusty gray. The rest of the entire run is absolutely pristine and white. I wonder if somebody read them. I think they were subscribed to, and somebody did read them, but things like that. And I acquired Mother Earth, Emma Goldman's journal at that time, copies of anti-slavery almanacs, anti-slavery standards came from that period as well. And what interested me at that time in my collecting, in delving into the 19th century, and this was really, remember, we're not learning this history in school, was the fact that there was such a deep entwining of the anti-slavery movement and the women's movement. And we point out in the exhibition downstairs, the labels do not shy away from the fact that the suffragists were really not perfect in lack of support of voting rights for African American men. But it was acquiring those things and then digging deeper into those areas, acquiring Mother Earth, the journal, the anarchist journal from Chicago, which was called Lucifer. Those were the things that I began with in some deep and fundamental way. And it was from there that I began going back and understanding that there was an earlier history. But I didn't know that.
Every meaningful collection has boundaries and parameters. Can you talk a little bit about what shapes your collection? What's in and what's out?
The really terrific thing about the boundaries is that I can change them all the time. And I do. And it used to be that I went from the Renaissance through Emma Goldman and the Spanish Civil War, and that was my cutoff. And then I was confronted with a fantastic poster, a great poster from the 50s of a woman, an African-American woman who was a magician. And it's not at Duke yet. It will eventually, I suppose, be here, but it pushed the boundary. I can make those decisions. It doesn't have to stop in 1930. It can continue as far as I would like it to go. And it's funny because I had a correspondence with my friend, late Ricky Jay, who just died recently. I wrote to Ricky. Ricky was a great collector of magic. And I wrote to him asking if he had a copy of this, anything from this family of magicians. It was the second generation. The father in the end of the 19th century was a magician, Ellen Marshall, and Ellen Armstrong. And he wrote back to me saying, I didn't buy one, and it wasn't within the parameters that I had set for his own collection. And I said, well, I have bought it. And it's so interesting because I've really not been rigid about that. And because the collection has always been a voyage of discovery. I didn't know these things existed until I found them. I didn't know there was, I had no idea that there were women who were doing so many different vocations in the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. So I think being rigid is foolhardy when you're collecting. Though I say that a good friend of mine is here, great collector, Mark Samuels Lassner, and he collects the 1890s, and he's very, very strict about that. And we don't really compete, but he's very encapsulated in the 1890s. I should acknowledge another friend of mine who is here, Carolyn Schimmel. Carolyn Schimmel, who Carolyn Schimmel is also a really significant collector of women's work, women's things. She collects women on the frontier. Her collection is at University of Pennsylvania. Part of it, anyway, is there. But Carolyn and I, we hated each other before we knew each other. Because we didn't really realize that we were not truly competing, that we had divided the world, unbeknownst to the other, we had divided the world of women. And though Carolyn, I am quite jealous, Carolyn owns 2 copies of Maria Sublimarian's, three copies, 4 now, of The Insects of Suriname, which is an extraordinary book, and I've never been able to afford one. Carolyn, however, has been able to. Okay.
You've spoken in previous settings a bit about the difficulty of being a woman collector and difficulties of working in the trade. Could you talk a little bit about that and provide perhaps some advice for young women thinking about collecting?
The first time I ever went to Sotheby's sale room in London, it was horrible. It was a book sale, and there was a table in a U shape that was inhabited by sort of elderly white males, and there was no place for a woman in there. And I really wanted the item that was in that sale, and I was going to persist and not be intimidated by these men. It is a very male, it's a very gendered, I won't say vocation, but collecting is in some ways a vocation. But I persisted. I sat at that table, and I bid, and in fact it was for a Lady Wilde letter. It was the letter is here, and it's a letter, Oscar Wilde's mother, and the letter says that once married, a woman becomes a house leak. She's like a mop, and it was such a significant moment to be able to compete with those men and walk out with the thing that I intended to buy, and I did. So it's a tough and competitive world, book collecting. But there are terrific young women in the trade. There's a company called Honey and Wax in New York, and they have established a book collecting prize for young women under 30. So the issue is not simply that it's gendered, it's also older people. And kids collect. I started collecting as a child, whether you're collecting rocks or menus or spoons or baseball cards. It's that instinct to gather things together and collect. But I think Honey and Wax's book collecting prize for women under 30 has been an astonishing revelation to them, the two women who own Honey and Wax. It's $1,000, which is a very significant amount of money for a young collector. And they've had such inventive responses, and the sorts of things that women are collecting has been a revelation. So it's exciting. Yeah, there's still a book collectors club, not the Grolier, because they finally saw the light, though they used to have an annual Women's Day. Guests, the invitations used to arrive, and they would say guests, but not including ladies, may be invited. But the Grolier Club has women members now since the late 70s. Mary Hyde, Lady Eccles was the first member, and there are significant women collectors. And I never met other women collectors until I became a member of the Grolier Club. But the Club of Odd Volumes in Boston votes every year to exclude women, right, Sarah? No women members.
Their loss.
Yes, it is their loss. They don't want to give up their cigar smoking or something.
One of the things that I learned when we were putting the exhibition together is that you do not have favorite items in the collection.
It's having favorite children?
It's having favorite children, yes. But I wonder if there are a few items that you might highlight as exemplifying your vision in collecting.
I own a first edition of the poems of Phyllis Wheatley, published it's in the exhibition. I learned a lot from that particular book. When I acquired the book, it was in pretty wretched condition, and it upset me a great deal looking at it. It was lacking a back cover, it had been sewn together, so I wrapped it up carefully in paper, and I put it in Virginia Woolf's desk, in fact, which used to store lots of things. So Phyllis Wheatley was in Virginia's desk. It had a great capacity. That desk, the lid lifts up, and it held a lot of things. But I learned, years later, I was going through the desk, and I went to find the book, and I unwrapped it. And in that intervening period of time, I really had learned to understand much more about the material object itself. And that is something that's very important. that we're looking at provenance, we're looking at history. I looked at the ownership. I understood that somebody lovingly sewed that book together each time they used it. The book is stitched, and if you can see it clearly in the case where it's on exhibition. And it also has not once but twice the signature of a person who owned it within 10 years of Wheatley's publishing the poems, a woman called Melatiah Bentz. And Naomi, in fact, did some research and discovered that Melatiah Bentz, in fact, was a working woman. She was a tavern keeper in Milton, Massachusetts. It's signed Milton, Massachusetts. So that Wheatley was an instructive, I learned a great deal from that book. I miss the Charlotte Bronte needlework. That was a great buy. That was at also a Sotheby's sale or Christie's sale, I can't remember. But it was in a clothing sale. It was in a sale that had Fortuny gowns and not literary things. And I was able to purchase it because of that. So a few pretty good things. I miss the banner. The banner that, there's a facsimile of the Justice banner that hung in my library. And that really, that message is what my life has been about. And so that banner's presence is really missed. That justice was to be done, always. So I love the banner. And I have to acknowledge Jeff Towns, a great mentor of mine and dealer in Swansea in Wales, from whom that banner came. He rang me one day and said, "There's a banner coming up for sale." I said, "We're not going to be able to touch it." And he said, "Well, let's try. You don't have to pay me. I'll put it out." That's always been a really terrific thing about dealers. They develop, Jeff specifically, really had a vested interest in my collection because he had been so involved in finding things for me and showing me things. And but he did bid and was able to buy that great Women's Social and Political Union banner, which was made by, as Naomi discovered, it was made by sisters in Ilford in London. I miss the banner, yeah. But it's, what is so fantastic is that everything is here, it is safe. I live in a wooden New England farmhouse. My anxiety, you know, I'm not in town, and my anxiety of something happening to Virginia Woolf's desk was such an enormous burden, and it was overwhelming to me. And the manuscript, and every little bit and piece of paper. I mean, it's not, there's a little scrap of paper which is Hannah Mather Crocker, tucked into one of the boxes of books that I just, so even an insignificant tiny little piece of paper has the equivalent to me of Virginia Woolf's desk. And it was really not something easy to contemplate, the fact that these things might be lost. And it's our history. So I'm about saving history and pushing it out into the world. And that's why it's here. And now? Questions?
So now perhaps we could get some questions from the audience. We've heard a little bit from Lisa. What questions might there be? There's a mic coming. And if you could talk into it as if it were an ice cream cone.
Yeah.
I was curious if you would share your collecting history of the Sojourner Truth books and how you got involved with her story.
Well, in that case with the Sojourner Truth things, there is a little pamphlet titled Fanaticism. And I found that pamphlet in dealers in London, it was marked £3. Ultimately, he said, take it, have it as a present. But it's an object that is enormously interesting to me. I use it as a teaching device when people come to visit. I always have had classes come to the house. The library has always been open to scholars, to classes at the 5 colleges. And to explain what collecting is, you're always pitting your knowledge against someone else. And in that instance, it was a dealer, and I had to keep my mouth shut. So on that title page, the name Sojourner Truth does not appear on the title page. But I knew that Sojourner Truth was Isabella. That was her slave name in New York State. And I kept my mouth shut. And when the dealer said, oh, just take it, I was very gracious and said, oh, thank you. But the things in that case are particularly important to me. Sojourner Truth I live in Northampton, Massachusetts, in a part of Northampton called Leeds. There was a utopian community in Florence, the village of Florence, Massachusetts, and that utopian community was race, class, gender, and religion equal. It was not very long-lived, but it was very important. And Truth, in fact, had a house in Florence, Massachusetts for about 14 years. It was an amazing community. David Ruggles, anybody know who David Ruggles was? One? A few people. Okay, you know who David Ruggles is. David Ruggles was the first African-American bookseller. He was a printer. He published a journal called The Mirror of Liberty. Alas, I don't have any copies, but Duke now has a great David Ruggles letter, happily, that came up at auction a year ago, 2 years ago, I think 2 years ago. But Ruggles came to Northampton. He had founded the Vigilance Committee one of the founders, and he was the secretary of the Vigilance Committee in New York. His bookshop was on Lispenard Street. And it was David Ruggles who gave probably 600 to 700 enslaved people, brought them to freedom. He was a freeborn African American. And amongst the people that he saw to freedom was Frederick Douglass, who in fact was married in Ruggles' apartment on Lispenard Street. And at that moment, there were no, libraries did not allow access to black people. And that's really why Ruggles developed his bookshop as a reading room in the back of his printing office. And he did have a grocery as well. That enough of an answer? Okay. The mics are coming.
I may be naive, but why would it be more difficult for a woman to acquire items for a collection than it would be a man? Wouldn't it be a matter of going to an auction, you put a bid in, or perhaps women were not allowed to attend certain auctions? What seems to be the problem there?
Women are not, if you go to an antiquarian book fair, which I do, have done, have exhibited at for many years, the people who tend to elicit interest from dealers tend to be men. And men, the assumption is that women don't have any money to spend, that they're not doing anything particularly, they're not taken seriously. And I think that is shifting. There's also discrimination against women dealers. So the young women now, there's this terrific group of women, they're organizing feminists. They have an initiative, a women's initiative of the American Antiquarian Booksellers Association. And they're organizing, they're making meetings, they're doing panels, they're informing people. And they're not allowing the place that had been historically made for them they're not keeping in that place. There isn't, however, a single African-American member of the ABAA, nor is there a single black member of the British Antiquarian Booksellers Association. So there's lots of work that needs to be done.
Hi, I want to echo the thanks that have been offered for selecting Duke as a home for this amazing collection. Thank you for that. As a sophisticated collector, you're probably, I'm imagining, balancing out your head and your heart as you're looking at things to collect. And I'm curious if you've ever erred on one side or the other and later regretted it. So you were motivated to...
Collectors never rue what they've bought, it's what they've missed. And I think we've all had experiences like that. A moment that I savor, though, was there used to be a Madison Square Garden flea market annually in New York. And this is in the 60s, and I would go around the Madison Square Garden flea market, and I would say to the exhibitors, do you have any things about women? These days, by the way, every other day there's a women's catalog that drops in, one's mailbox. But I was going through the Madison Square Garden flea market, and this gentleman said to me, I have a box of things, you might be interested in it. And I looked at the box, opened it, and it was just a brown cardboard corrugated box, but it was filled with the photographic record of a woman whose name was Adelaide Johnson. Adelaide Johnson was the sculptor of the suffrage movement. And she sculpted, there are two sculptures of women in the Capitol in Washington, and one is a piece of sculpture that was installed within the past few years, dedicated, and it's Adelaide Johnson's sculpture of Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. These were her working photographs and her notes and ephemera. Her papers are at the Library of Congress, but I bought that box of Adelaide Johnson's preparatory photographs. Anne's nodding. Yes.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll have time to view the exhibition.
Hi, Lisa. My name's Madison Rutenberg. I think you know my dad, Howard Rutenberg, and my grandmother, Barbara Rutenberg. I'm now a third-generation book dealer. And
Brava.
Yes,
Good
thank
for
you.
Yay.
And I guess I'd just like to get your opinion and your advice in a Marie Kondo world where people are trying to minimize and get rid of things, how to get particularly millennials and younger people to really be excited about, well, I know people are excited about books. Books are never going to go out of style, but just collecting in general when the wave is to get rid of things. So just would love to hear your opinion on that.
Well, I think one of the things that we do, I teach at CABS, Colorado Antiquarian Book Seminar, and did you go to CABS? And there's been a terrific, really amazing group of young women dealers who've been attending, and librarians as well as, so it's booksellers, librarians, and an occasional collector. And it's been interesting one of the things we talk about is new areas. What are we looking at for the future? What can we collect? And there are young dealers now who are selling things that weren't particularly of interest to people historically. You cannot I can't buy a Renaissance book. I cannot buy a 16th century book easily. Catalogs this week that came were quite, something that was offered, Andy and I were talking about it, it was $17,000. I bottom feed. And I think it's important. And to begin to design and understand there are areas, people are collecting zines. I mean, these are things that are being made today. That's really important. It's documenting our history as we're living it. What's happening at Is there a strike going on somewhere? Where's all the ephemeral stuff that's being handed out? Is somebody keeping that and documenting it? So I think there are areas, Brian Cassidy, there are young dealers who are working on this, Honey and Wax, Brian Cassidy, Lauren Baer, doing social movements, radicalism, but things that were not particularly taken seriously by people in the past. And this was a very traditional area. Collecting was not something, there have been some great women collectors, but it hasn't by and large been an area that moves with the time and takes the responsibility of documenting contemporary things. And I think a lot of the dealers are doing that. Cornell University, Catherine Reagan, who also teaches at CABS, Cornell has been collecting and has the most important collection of hip hop in the country. Sarah Thomas was at Cornell when that began. But it's so important to have that vision and understanding that you cannot just be mired in the dead white male past. Really. We got another history. Thank you.